My job today, head gasket on my Series 1 Land Rover 2 litre engine. Slightly different from the normal engines as it's not in a Land Rover. It's in my 1947 Rover. So slightly more complicated. Right, that's the first part of the strip down. Bonnet off, side panels off, carb off, distributor out. Onwards and upwards. Stripping. The rocker shaft is now off. The push rods are out and marked on a bit of cardboard. When you take the push rods out, turn them slightly as you pull them out, because I'm not sure if you can pull the cam follower out at the same time. Right, next stage, head is all unbolted. I've had to take the fuel pump off, which is a good job because it's full of rubbish. What I have got to be careful of is this tube, which is the temperature sender tube. It's probably quite expensive to replace if I break it. So, head off. First inspection don't look too bad, no burnt valves. Bores look pretty good. Yeah, it wasn't a new engine when I bought it, so what can you say? Setting the head down here. Looks pretty good, no burnt valves on there either. Bit of coke, but then you'd expect that after 30 years. Let's continue, get the gasket off. So the reason I took this gasket off originally was took the head off originally, because I had an oil leak on this side of the engine, which was running down under the carburetor, and I couldn't see why. I did a compression test, which was about 100 on each one, which is alright, but I can't see any obvious signs of oil on this side. Obviously there's a problem there, which is looks like it was blowing through as well. This side seems to be alright. There is a bit of damage on the around. The cylinder head is okay. Can't see any visual signs of blowing through or anything like that. A lot of coke. So that'll be a job to be done. And the block, basically the same. Can't see any reason why oil would be leaking through there, down the bottom. Again, we're gonna have to have a decoat because the valves are pretty heavy. I was hoping not to have to do that, but there you go. So next job, get them studs out, because I had a hell of a job to get the head off with all the stuff that's in the way. Alright, quick clean up of the cylinder head. Shows no cracks and no real damage. There is a little bit there and there, but I don't think I'm going to bother too much about it. It didn't leak before, so next job on that is to do the valves. And a quick clean of the block reveals the same thing. No damage, no visual areas of oil leaking or anything like that. Very strange really. Never mind, carry on. So as you can see, all the valves are out. Very little wear on any of the valve seats, which ain't bad, like I said, for 30 years since I touched it. The valves are pretty good as well. I did used to sell a fuel additive called Eco-Tin, and I've used it in my vehicles for a long time now, so it seems to have actually done a very good job of keeping the valves decent. Let's see what I like when they're out ground in. Right then, 3 valves ground in. You can see the difference between the seats. That one's not done yet, so it's nice and shiny. And that one is very clean and grey looking. I know it doesn't look too much different, but trust me it is. And here's the valve that's ground in. Grey all the way around. Whereas this is one that isn't done. It's silver and shiny all the way around. So, there you go. So if you're not familiar how to do valves, which I assume most people would be, but you never know these days, the idea is you put your valve grinding paste in there, take it down. I always use a bit of WD-40 just to give it a bit of wet. A bit of oil would probably be alright, like so. And then with 2 hands, I'm not that clever, I can only do it with one holding the camera. You just, like that, basically. Okay. And then when you see the valve is nice and clean all the way around, like that, no burn marks, no scuffs and scrapes, and the seat is the same. Alright, there's a few little marks there, but they're not too much to worry about. That basically is all you got to make sure you do. Last valve going in, as you can see, not a lot of slack. So that'll be alright. So that one goes in there. Obviously you put the valve that you took out back in the same hole. That goes on there. And then your valve lifter works like that. Your 2 little collets go in like that. And then you slowly let the valve lifter off so you don't pinch your fingers, like so. And there you have it. That basically is grinding valves and refitting. So here we are again. The next job is to grind in these valves. They are quite coked up, but as I've already said, 30 years of use is not too bad. Biggest problem with this job is that I've got to get the manifold off and the plate underneath the manifold to get to the valves. So that's the job for today. As you can see, it's pretty tight to get those nuts off. You'd never get a socket on it, and you'd never get a ring span on it. So I bought these years ago, obviously Whitworth for the job, and for the first time I actually found a use for them. Look at that, eh? How simple is that? Right. Quite hard looking in this camera and trying to do it at the same time. Well, there you go, you got the idea. So, all the old tools are best. Right, so manifold off, side cover off. There's the actual valves that we need to get at. Now I don't want to strip out the shaft, but I'm hoping that by undoing this adjuster I'll have enough room to get the lifter in to actually pull the collets out and everything else. Right, don't forget, I think that's going to fall off maybe when you undo it, and also the two collets in there are going to drop in there if you're not careful. So the idea is to fill that with rag and everything else, and hopefully we'll do the job. We'll see, I'll let you know in a minute. Right, so on this engine those pieces don't come off or fall off, or maybe they unscrew, but don't leave it to chance on the engine that you're doing. Make sure you keep your fingers on them. I've got the two middle ones are free and enough room to get them out, but the two end ones are obviously squeezed up on the cam, so I've adjusted them back as far as I can, but I'll have to turn the engine over to free them up at a later date. Well, in about 20 minutes hopefully. So two valves out, just going to do them two at a time. That one's got a bit of coke on the top, but not too bad. This one's pretty good. The actual seat is pretty good as well. Very little coke in there for 30 years of use. The valve is pretty good. Little mark on there, we'll see if that'll come out in a minute. But not too bad at all. Quite happy with that. And the coke build-up is very minimal. Excellent news. Can't see any bits burnt or whatever. So on to the next three. Hopefully they're as easy as that one. So that's two done, and as you can see there's a nice lip, so they're not sunk into the head too far, which means that the valve seat recession I talked about earlier hasn't happened on this engine, which is pretty good, like I said, after 30 years of use using the E5 or cheap Morrison's fuel. So two middle valves are in. I've turned the engine over so that it's on either top dead center or something or other, so that the tappet is on the back of the cam, which means it's not on the rise of the lobe but free. So I've got me rag in, so hopefully we won't drop any collets from this one either, and then we'll move on to that last one there, which is exactly the same. That's free as well, because the engine is top dead center on those two pistons. So we shall see. And another successful extraction, Doctor, and I haven't dropped any of the collets. So far so good, and we'll see what the valves are like. You can see it now, look. The edge is very good and the underside is okay, so it should clean up alright. Today we're going to try and get the slack out of that there. Now you have to have a bit of slack between the that piece and the bottom of the valve, otherwise it'll all jam up and you won't have any room for movement when it all warms up. So the idea is to turn that one up until your slack is just about disappeared. Again, I'm doing this with one hand, back to front, because my cameraman's not here today. Shopping again. So you tighten that one up. And I think the gap on this one is 12 thou. Oh dear, here we go. Right. So you get your feeler gauges, which are these things here. Alright, they're all numbered. Probably can't see that number on there. Try another pair. There, you can see the numbers on there. Okay, so we want 12 thou, or in modern money 0.305 millimeters. There. Okay. See this one here, it says on this engine the exhaust valve, which is the one we're doing, is 12. So that one has to go in there, like so. That is too slack. Right. So you keep turning. I've never actually been told the exact thing, but generally I do it if that's too slack there. Look, that's sliding in and out. Still a little bit slack. So if you've got like an interference, right, that's too tight because I've got to shove it in too hard. Oh no, that's about right there. Okay, so that's just an interference fit sliding. Try to make them all the same, and then you tighten the nut up like so. Give you a little spanner like that. Check again. Spot on. So that's that one. Tap it done. Now, to be right, that rocker there, which goes up and down, there, look, that one, is on the back of the camshaft. Now, I haven't got a camshaft to show you, but in real Blue Peter terms, here's one I made earlier. Basically, it's a round shaft with lumps on it in different angles, so that each lump has its own valve to work. And this is the valve, obviously. So the rocker has to be on the back of the cam, so not on the top of the, not on that bit, not there, but on the there, which as you can see is, there's the shape of it, look. Right. So the rocker has to be on there, so that the valve is like that, so that you can adjust your tappet. Otherwise, if it's like that and you try to adjust it, it's no good. Okay, so this camshaft on this engine has to be turned so that you're on top dead center on the compression stroke, which means this valve is closed. Okay, but don't assume that because that is up the top that's the compression. That could be the exhaust stroke, in which case that valve would be open, so it would be on there. All right, I hope that makes a bit of sense. So each one of these there has to be, the engine has to be turned over. See, that one could be the same, look, because the valve is closed. Okay, as you can see, or not. Now look, the valve is closed, so that could be on the right stroke. We can turn the engine over and find out. These here are for the inlet valves, which I will explain later. Okay, so that's the next job, is to do those. So when you've done all four, you can turn the engine over like so, and you can see, hopefully, everything working. Right, so all the valves are opening and closing in the right place. And when you've turned it over a couple of times, go back and check your measurements, check your gap, see if it's alright. So now we're ready to put the head on, but something that I think is quite important, you need to get a tap like that and run down through all of the bolts where the bolts fit to clean the muck out of the thread. Okay, don't forget, on this engine you've got two different sizes, but make sure when you've done the tapping that you blow out with an airline, blow out the holes, because the muck in the bottom could give you a false bottom, and when you're tightening the bolts up they could hit the muck rather than have room to tighten properly. So you would need to do it, make sure that's cleaned out inside. Also, while you're at it, you could run this down through where the plugs are while the head is off, just to clean the thread for the plugs as well. And the next stage for me is to smear the block with grease. That gives it some sort of help with the sealing, but also it stops the gasket sliding off on this engine because it's on a slope. So I'll put the gasket on. It'll only go on one way, and it says on there, you can see it, this side up. So that's the way to put it on. Like so. Alright, and I have got a pin that I use just to keep that in position when I put the head on. There are two larger ones that go in there that hold the rockers on, but they're just too long for me to lift the head over and get it in on this particular situation. So I'm going to grease up the head gasket now, this side, and then we'll go from there. Right, gasket's on, greased on this side. Whatever you do, don't forget to put the little rubber ring in there. Are a 7/16 18 TPI and a 3/8 20 TPI. And you can see the muck that come out of the threads, so it's a good thing to do that, isn't it? So as you can see, there's 4 different bolt sizes on here. That's the 2 very small ones for the top. Right, head is on. All the bolts are in place. Don't go tightening them up till you've got them all in and caught. Then you can tighten them up. The 2 big ones, long ones, have to be tightened up. So what you do, you use 2 nuts. And you tighten the bottom one to the top one. As I said, there's 4 different lengths of bolts, and you can see why now, because of the different thicknesses of the head here, here and here. There's also 2 different sizes. The 2 different bolt sizes are 5/16 Whitworth for the smaller ones at the top, and 3/8 width for the bigger ones. To put these in, use 2 nuts. Alright, so you put that 2 nuts on there and tighten them like that. Tighten the 2 together. Use the bottom one to tighten to the top, or whichever you want to do. Put that in there like that. Start it off. And then just basically, using your spanner, tighten the 2 nuts together and wind it in. Like so, until it gets to the bottom. And then you take the 2 nuts off and put it on the other one. Right, but make sure there's a collar on that end. That has to go into the block. See the difference? Right, so the collar goes into the block. I'll tighten them up and I'll come back to you. So I've tightened the head down with this thing called a torque wrench. And what you do is you set the tightness on this scale here, whichever scales you've got. This engine is in pounds foot, so you turn that until you get it pounds foot, and then when it's tight, what will happen is it clicks like that. So it's like a ratchet, but it's got a brake on it. Okay, don't forget there's 2 sizes of bolts and there's 2 different tensions. So if you've got another torque wrench like here, a smaller one, you can do the smaller ones with that one. Again, you set to what you want on the scale. Right, what we're going to do today is to put that rocker shaft on there. Alright, so as a precaution, just in case you drop something, I've put the plugs in, just caught them. I've squirted some oil down the board for when we turn over first, because it's obviously so dry in there. But the first job is to put these, what they call push rods, in. So as you can see, I've marked them so that they'll go in the same place as they came out of, which is obviously that way. Okay, so basically different ends, obviously, so you can't put them in the wrong way. Right, that goes down there like that, like that, and into that cup down there. And the next one the same. In there and down into that cup. Okay, so you do the other 2 exactly the same, and then you can assemble the rockers onto the top, and I'll show that in a minute. So that's the rocker shaft almost in place. You have to make sure the rockers go into the push rods as you're assembling it, and also there's a hole in that mounting there, look. Okay, so a bolt goes through there, but that little hole has to go under that pin. Same with all 4 of the mounts. Okay, sometimes you have to give it a little tap just to make sure it goes on square, but it should be okay. I'm going to try and show you how to tap it. Alright, so at the moment we've got a gap, so that means the valve is fully shut and the gap is there. and that means that that valve, that follower on the end of there, is on the back of the cam, which I shall show you how that works in a minute. So what you've got to do to make sure it is at the top is to turn the engine over so that the valve is opening. Alright, so it's like walking up a hill. When you get to the top, you go over the top and the valve closes. Okay, so you've got the gap. Now the gap on the inlet valve should be 10, which is that one, very thin. Okay, goes in there. That is too slack, obviously. So you undo the nut with your spanner, screwdriver, hopefully you can see that. See if we can do it one-handed. Tighten it down a bit. Tighten it till it's touching, and then we can check the gap. Too tight. Open it up a little bit. A bit loose. Still a bit loose. And that is spot on. Just a bit of interference there. Okay. So then you get your spanner and you tighten your nut up. Should do this with two hands really, but there you go. Alright, so tighten that up and recheck in case you've turned the adjusting screw. There you go. Perfecto. And that's your 10 thou gap to allow for expansion. So you do that on all four, and then that'll be that job done. So this is a better camshaft than the other one that I had, and I'll show you what I mean. That's a lobe, and each lobe works with a different valve. Okay, so that's the back of the cam, that's the top of the lobe. So when you're adjusting your tappet, the cam has to be like that, the follower is on there, the push rod is on like so, and then as it goes around, it raises up, opens the valve, and closes the valve. And that, at that point, is where you set your gap, because that would be a bit difficult to explain, like that. So there would be your gap. And that's how you would adjust your gap on your tappets. Okay. So basically that's it. Just a question of putting back everything that you took off. I've got a Weber carb on this engine, which is jetted to fit to suit this 2 litre Land Rover engine, which is okay. The only other problem would be the disc which goes in that hole. It has got an offset key on the end, so in theory it will only go in one way. So you put it in like so, get your rotor arm, put that one on, and then you turn it until it locks in, like so. Okay, and that basically, if you've altered the timing slightly, then you need to set it. What I did was undo the main bolt there, if you can see it, and take the whole distributor out with the clamp on it. And that really is it, other than the fact you've got to get it running. And best of luck with that.